If you want to dramatically increase your ability to think faster, communicate effectively, and perform at an elite level, you need to challenge your mind with harder and harder books. But you might also find the prospect of reading hard books intimidating and overwhelming. In this video, I'm going to show you 3 strategies I use to simplify the process of reading hard books. Strategies I've developed in the process of writing and researching for a 300+ page academic text, and that I've taught to many of my top performing students. These strategies work together as a system, so if you skip any of them, it might just be the reason you continue to struggle. So let's start with the first strategy, reading in levels. No matter what kind of research project I've ever done, whether that's been my undergraduate honors thesis or my work in value theory, I've consistently used this strategy to get a better grasp of the overall topic while simultaneously gaining key insights on a multitude of relevant details. And this method has helped me distill exactly what I need in order to communicate my ideas persuasively and effectively. And so here's how it works. Let's say you're reading on a topic, let's say American history, but you're interested in something specific, such as the labor movement in the late 19th century. Well, one reason you probably find it difficult to read a specific book you pick up on this topic is because you lack necessary context. And so as you read, your mind doesn't know which details to focus on or even what certain terms mean. That's why you need to read 3 types of books simultaneously. What I call a broad book, a niche book, and a mid-level book. Typically, it's your niche book that's going to be the hardest, although that often depends. Taking the example of American history again, your niche book might be something like Workmen's Democracy, The Knights of Labor, and American Politics by Leon Fink. This book is a very specific snapshot of the topic of American history you want to study. And once again, one of the main reasons you find this kind of book difficult is because it probably contains lots of new terms, ideas, or background context that you lack. This causes that feeling of cognitive load we're all familiar with. The feeling that, wow, there's just too much information here for me to absorb and I'm not quite getting it all. And that's precisely why you read your broad book and mid-level book. Your broad book might be something as simple as the great book, The Rise of American Democracy by the renowned historian Sean Wilentz. You see, this kind of book gives you a really broad overview of the entire topic. It's this type of book that would likely introduce you to certain terms, frameworks, ideas, and key events that put everything into context that you're reading in your niche book. And your mid-level book should be on a topic that's slightly broader than your niche book, yet slightly more specific than your broad book. For instance, in this case, you might read something like Labor in America, A History by Melvin Dubofsky and Joseph A. McCartin. In my own field of value theory, for instance, if I heard that someone were reading the book The Metaphysics of Morals by Immanuel Kant, which is a really difficult book, I might recommend they simultaneously or first read the book An Introduction to Ethics by Jeffrey Thomas as their broad book and something like The Sources of Normativity by Christine Korsgaard as their mid-level book. You might feel as though reading 3 books at once is gonna overwhelm you, but actually, as you engage in this approach, you'll quickly find that the opposite is true. You'll inevitably find overlap in certain themes, concepts, and context among the 3 books, and it will make reading your niche book, as well as even harder books you want to read in the future, easier and easier to handle. But just identifying which 3 books to read in these categories isn't enough. If you don't identify certain key structures underlying the books you're reading and take advantage of those structures, you'll probably still feel overwhelmed. And that's exactly why you need to engage in our second strategy here, distinguishing between dense and light. In addition to all the academic books I've read, I also used to read a plethora of various self-help books and finance books because I had been running businesses for some period of time. But why do I bring this up? Well, have you ever picked up a book someone recommended to you and you realize that the entire 200 pages or so could have been a simple 20-page summary? Well, essentially, that's how most self-help books are, and this is because for the majority of self-help books, the pattern of content delivery is essentially the same. What I call light structure. 1, new concept. 2, 1 to 2 stories or examples that relate to that concept. 3, restatement of that concept. And this pattern typically takes up maybe 3 to 5 pages. And the thing is, self-help books are not the only type of books like this. There are actually a multitude of genuinely helpful books out there that assume this structure, including many of the broad books you'll read, and As we'll see, identifying which of the books you're reading have this structure is essential for understanding how to read them effectively. But before we see why, let's contrast these light structure books with very difficult books. Say, The Crisis of European Sciences and Transcendental Phenomenology by Edmund Husserl, The Neurobiology of Neural Networks by Daniel Gardner, or quite frankly, anything by the post-structuralist philosopher Derrida. Well, what makes these particularly difficult? It's the fact that you have to engage with the text actively. It's the fact that practically every few lines you have to reflect on the author's statement, consider it, and wrestle with it for a moment, and then continue on to the next statement and the next one. And this is because these books have what I call dense structure. Roughly speaking, this structure is as follows: 1. New concept A, 2. New concept B, 3. New concept C, 4. Synthesis of concepts A and B, B and C, A and C, or A, B, and C. Like light structure books, sometimes there are also examples given, but usually if there are examples given, those examples themselves also contain some new concepts. Call them A1, B1, and C1. And unlike the 3 to 5 pages taken to cover one new concept in light structure books, all of these 3 concepts, as well as their syntheses and any examples, could take up just 1 page, or even half a page. Now, you might think off the bat that we should automatically read light structure books faster and dense structure books more slowly, but you'd only be half right. Because how you should read each book depends entirely on our last strategy: goal-based selective reading. Now, off the bat, you might hear goal-based anything with respect to reading and be immediately turned off. I get it. In our modern world, everything seems to be about optimization, and oftentimes when any idea of optimization starts to creep into the humanities or art, which is at least in part where the activity of reading resides, it can start to feel a little icky. But here's the thing. You're spending time tackling a very difficult topic, and the truth is you really do want to get as much out of it as possible. So we do need some level of strategy here. And this strategy is the most important of the 3. So by this point, you should have your broad book, your niche book, and your mid-level book. And you should identify which of these are light structure books and which of these are dense structure books. Okay, so now what? How do we now read these to maximize the amount of valuable knowledge we gain from them? Well, it all depends on your goal. And I left this for the end here because honestly, if you've ever just gone headfirst into reading a bunch of books, you can probably agree with me that a lot of the time we dive headfirst into this with no clear goal. But that's okay. Consider that when PhD candidates start researching for their theses, the process is also pretty scattered. And it was the same for me when I was writing my first academic text. I basically found myself reading a bunch of books and journal articles, and it was only over time that I started to realize what I wanted to focus on, zoom in on, and actually write about or specialize in. And so, yeah, you need a goal, but you're probably gonna have to do a good bit of aimless reading using our first 2 strategies first, and then be patient with yourself to begin to notice where your interests keep coming back to. Do you start to notice you're interested in a certain type of poetry? Do you keep getting attracted to some specific research topic in biology? Maybe AI and computer science topics, or business and sales topics? Don't judge yourself based on what you think you should read or on what others are reading. Let your interests guide you. Once you start to have a clearer picture of the general topic or topics you want to continue to read about, continue to do our first 2 steps, but simply add the following ingredient into the mix, namely develop a research question. And this could actually be a set of questions instead of just one. For instance, currently I'm interested in 2 questions. 1, cognitively and metaphysically speaking, how is meaning constituted in the mind? And 2, how do empires rise and fall? How do democracies develop? And what social model best explains the behavior of nation states? These are simply my current focuses, but these might change over time. That being said, having specific research questions questions in mind has a major impact on how I read each type of book, whether that's a light structure book or a dense structure book, and this is why. Let's take the example of my second research question here. For this, I'd probably need to read some general histories of each part of the world as my broad books, which is what I've done. General histories of China, Latin America, Russia, African kingdoms, and so on. Some of these have relatively dense structure, and some have relatively light structure. But do you think based on my research questions I need to understand every single detail of every single war, rebellion, and the like? Probably not. Instead, I'll probably pay the most attention to facts and ideas related to land expansions, wars and invasions, and internal government structures, generally glossing through the big ideas in the lighter structure books and slowing down to take more nuanced notes on these ideas in the denser structure books. Taking this approach will really help you prioritize your focus and make your reading more efficient. But how about niche books I've read, such as David Savage's great book, The Decline and Rise of Democracy, in which he outlines a mixture of qualitative and quantitative models for the causes of democratic versus autocratic development. If I'm serious about my research question, which I am, I'll probably want to read this book, which is more along the lines of a dense structure book, once again, more slowly, taking specific notes on ideas related to my research questions as I go. Yet there have also been other dense structure books, somewhat aligned with Savage's book, that I've read as my mid-level books that I'll tend to read more quickly, and for the simple reason that they contain only bits and pieces of information that are actually relevant to my research questions. So then what's the bottom line here about how we should read each type of book? It's that knowing ahead of time, 1, my research questions, and 2, whether what I'm reading are dense structure books or light structure books, helps me to understand exactly how to read these books more effectively. For dense structure books that are your broad books or mid-level books, read through them quickly to get mostly your main points, slowing down to take notes and reflecting more closely on information as you go that's relevant to your research question. For dense structure books that are your niche book, read these slowly and don't worry about speed here. Focus on depth. Zoom in on and try to digest every detail you can. For light structure books that are your broad books or mid-level books, you can read through these quickly, but be sure to review them often. Just because these give you a general idea or general context doesn't mean you shouldn't spend time sitting with and reflecting on them. Often, it's actually even worth rereading these types of books several times to allow a narrative to form that connects the ideas in the other books you're reading. In fact, even for these books, I might also read them at a slower pace if I believe those stories or examples I'm reading are ones that I should save for later to cite, quote, or share in my own content somewhere. Yet again, a big part of your discretion here is simply being aware of the book's structure, which allows you to know where you can skim faster, where you should slow down, and where you should read more deeply. What hard books are you reading right now, and which hard books have you been putting off reading because you believe they'll be too much for you? And which of these strategies will you start implementing first? I'd love to hear from you in the comments, and if you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact not only on your own life, but also on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.